Hello and welcome to a special edition of News in Depth, on location in Titusville. I'm John Kelly of Florida Today, and this is Kennedy Space Center Bureau Chief Todd Halvorson. And we're here at Space View Park on the riverfront in Titusville to celebrate the first moon landing 40 years ago. Here in this park you can see the Apollo insignia behind us, representing the work of the astronauts and hundreds of thousands of people across the country who made the moon missions possible. We're right across the river from the site where Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Mike Collins launched on the mission to the moon. Spaceview Park has got a monument now to the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs. And there are a lot of space monuments and museums around the country, but this one's kind of unique, Todd, in that it really pays special attention to the men and women who worked behind the scenes.
That's absolutely right, John. If you look around the base just outside of the insignia, you'll see these little pillars, and they have the names of workers, plain ordinary folk, many from our community here in Brevard County that worked on the Apollo program. And they paid $100 to have a little plaque with their name engraved in the company they worked for. This is the only walk in the country that celebrates not only the Apollo program and the astronauts, but the men and women who were instrumental in getting our astronauts to the moon and safely back to Earth. Let's take a look at the making of this monument.
This is a blackboard sketch of how do we go to the moon? This guy originally was told he didn't know what he was talking about. But later on, they did it exactly the way he showed it here. Everybody has a certain passion. We eat up with passion about Apollo. So this monument means an awful lot to us. We come and see this monument. We see the names of the people that are on the engraved stones here. We see the handprints and the pictures of the astronauts. And we start reliving those days. And of course, we remember all of the great stuff, none of the bad stuff. These are the draftsmen, the secretaries, the inspectors, the technicians that were all required and an integral part of doing this. This is the working man's monument. Here are the working people here. And then a view across to the brand new VAB from Titusville. I always like that. Standing on a bank over here, that's what you see.
Yeah, I bought every book. I listened to, watch the DVDs when they would come out. Even met astronauts in the beginning. But mostly it was talking to the space workers because that was their original purpose, to tell the story of the Apollo program. But it was incredible just listening to their stories. These guys are as passionate about this monument as, say, the veterans on my World War II memorial. They're just as passionate.
This monument's been a long time coming for the Spacewalk Hall of Fame and the people of Titusville. The dedication of it here was a really special event. Let's take a look at some of the highlights from that celebration.
This month we obviously celebrate one of mankind's greatest achievements. Everyone who was alive in 1969 remembers the historic Apollo 11 moon mission. And 40 years ago yesterday, the greatest launch team in the world did what they always were good at, what they worked hard at each and every day, what made up the core and their very being. On July 16, 1969, with their usual painstaking attention to details and absolute focus, the Kennedy Space Center team launched the Saturn V on the legendary Apollo 11 mission. It is estimated that between 750,000 to 1 million people came to visit Brevard County to see this historic launch, to see what the Kennedy Space Center was up to. This whole street here, all along US 1, was filled with people. This Indian River was filled with boaters, and the people wanted to come and see what we were doing. Everyone all over the world stopped to see what was going on down here at Kennedy Space Center. We often speak of the astronauts during this anniversary, but the men who walked on the moon were figuratively standing on the shoulders of the thousands of Space Center workers who helped put them on the surface of Earth's celestial neighbor. And the astronauts yesterday actually paid tribute to all of you in the ceremony that we had out at the Saturn V Center.
I sat under the Saturn V yesterday and looked at that absolutely fantastic vehicle that took us to the moon and Apollo 11. When my flight went back in '71, they canceled the last 3 flights in the program for many, many various reasons. I think it was economic as much as anything. I also think somebody lost their courage. Because what can happen after you've had 6 very successful flights? However that happened, those last three Saturn V's are now on display. And the greatest display of all is sitting right here at KSC. Absolutely fantastic display. As I was disappointed that they didn't fly those 38 years ago, I am now really happy and proud that we got this thing sitting down here. And 1,000 years from now, when we are long, long gone, people are going to walk under that and say, "Oh my God, can you believe what they did 1,000 years ago with that thing?" Sort of like watching a tiger moth from 1920, right? We appreciate what they did, but it's a memento, and it's a representation of what one nation can do when they put their act together and everybody works going towards the same goal. And we did it 40 years ago. God bless all of you.
We dedicate this monument to those of you who worked Apollo, whether you were a cook, whether you were a test conductor, safety, inspection, engineer, it doesn't matter what you were. If you were a part of the people that sewed parachutes, if you were a part of the people who sent us the spare parts that we needed. 400,000 across the U.S. was the number that people vote today. 25,000 of those were at KSC. This park, these monuments, are dedicated to you and the astronauts that we helped put up and get back. How about, let's do the unveiling.
This is a great event. You know, it recognizes the people that made the visible stuff all possible. And the visible stuff, of course, is with, you know, the landing on the moon, the astronauts, the blast-offs, and that sort of thing. But behind that are thousands of workers and their families that worked their 12-hour shifts 7 days a week that made it possible for the visible stuff to happen. And that was the mantra, as it were, of the Apollo program. Everybody knew that you didn't have to have a highly visible job to be important. You could work on third shift in a building that didn't have windows on it, and you're just as important as someone in the firing room on launch day that's pressing buttons in front of the cameras. And that's one of the reasons why it was so successful, because everyone had a passion for what they did. They were dedicated to do it. There was great commitment and support for those folks, and the results speak for themselves. And this is a monument to those that didn't have the highly visible jobs, positions, responsibilities that made it all happen. The artistry of this is fantastic, and what's good about it is it represents the whole activity, not just the rocket or the spacecraft or the astronauts. You know, it's the symbol of Apollo, the Earth and the Moon, and it symbolizes that this whole country was wrapped up in this. It doesn't just focus on one element of that program that we all look back to with a lot of pride.
Well, you know, John, folks on the Space Coast have been celebrating all month. July 16th, 9:32 a.m. was the 40th anniversary of the Apollo 11 launch, and yesterday was the 40th anniversary of the landing on the moon on the Sea of Tranquility, when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first 2 human beings to set foot on another celestial body. Buzz was here on the Space Coast earlier this month. We got a chance to catch up with him.
Apollo represents a pioneering that clearly was not sustainable. And we found that out, so we sort of terminated Apollo. Unfortunately, from Sputnik to Apollo, we had continuity because we put Gemini in between Mercury and Apollo. And when the president said we're going to the moon, we had a really big Nova rocket that wouldn't be ready, 2 Saturn V's or lunar orbit rendezvous. And we had the flexibility to choose the best method. I believe that Apollo is best remembered and best honored on this 40th anniversary by very carefully looking at what we have chosen as a pathway, and if there are revisions to be made, make the most of the revisions, save the resources, chart a course. To me, that course is homesteading the planet Mars by pathways of many, many achievements, and doing that via the inner moon of Mars, Phobos.
Well, Todd, one of the cool things about the events that have been going on this week has been the inclusion of the workforce. You know, a lot of attention gets paid to the famous astronauts, you know, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins. But a lot of times we don't remember the long hours and time that got put in by hundreds and hundreds of people who lived here in Titusville and Cocoa Beach and Cape Canaveral and all over Brevard County in Central Florida. And it's been nice to get a chance to meet a lot of those people and hear their stories. And it must be really special for this community here in Titusville. You live here. How big of a part of this community is the space program and the historic events that so many of your neighbors took a part in?
Well, you know, John, the space program, and particularly the Apollo program, is just part of the fabric of our community. You can see it in the names on the street signs. You can see it in the names on our schools. You can see it on the signs on our churches. And it's just 25,000 people from Brevard County worked out at Kennedy Space Center at the peak of the Apollo program. And, you know, it is just a really big deal in this community to be able to celebrate, you know, one of the greatest achievements that, you know, the human race has ever, you know, achieved, actually. And, you know, hundreds of those folks got to reunite out at Fox Lake Park. Let's take a look at that celebration.
My favorite memory from the Apollo program, I think, was being the capsule communicator on Apollo 12. Apollo 12 was hit by lightning as it lifted off the pad. And when the lightning bolt went through the command and service module, it killed the electrical power system, and the computer just rolled over on her back. And luckily, the booster's computer system was working perfectly. So it took them into orbit, into a perfect orbit, all by itself, without any help from the crew. And so then we rebooted the computers, got the electrical power system going, and checked everything out, and everything was good, so they sent them off to the moon. But I was on duty when that lightning strike hit, and it was really, really wild.
I think those very first days when I went there and started getting together with the technicians and the hardware, I think that was a real eye-opener, learning the hardware and learning the missions and how all this stuff worked. I was a mechanical engineer, but before that, I had my own business. I was 17 years in the woodworking business. I built custom furniture and millwork and stuff like that. And somebody set fire to my place of business, and I couldn't rebuild. So I dusted off my diploma and came over here, and I got a job.
I was a technician on the pumping unit, the 008, that pumped fuel up to the service module, and they test fired it. My technician, John Grissinger, closed the hatch on Apollo 11. And that was, I told John later, of course, John has passed away, but I told him a couple of days after launch, I said, you don't realize now what part in history you played.
I feel very, very lucky, too. I'll tell you, just being a part of a historical situation like that is incredible. And to be able to share it with people is really a lot of fun, too. I enjoy doing public speaking, and I enjoy talking to kids. And that's one of the reasons here at KSC that I I spend time at the Visitor Center lecturing families in a program called the Astronaut Encounter for Delaware North. And it's a program where we tell people about our missions and answer their questions and then end up getting a picture taken with them. So it's a good program and I enjoy it.
We got to hear a lot of great stories from people the past few months as we prepared for this special 40th anniversary celebration. And one of the cool things we got to do was to gather people at Brevard Community College, where they came out and shared with us their photographs and their autographs and their mementos from that time. We've made a television special about that event called Moonlanding Memories, and your next chance to see it is going to be at 11 p.m. tomorrow night, right here on WBCC and FloridaToday.com. And it'll air again several more times this month. We're going to leave you today with an excerpt from that show. For Today in Brevard, I'm John Kelly.
And I'm Todd Halvorson.
And we'll see you again next Tuesday.
My name is Ricardo Perez. My father's name was Nino Perez, an IBMer from Binghamton, Owego, New York, and been transferred down here since 1965, 66 era, to go to the moon. And I have here a collection of certain things that partook in that project throughout the years of my dad's collection.
Well, first I'll tell them a story about the IBM guys. When the program first started, it obviously started on pad 34, because that was the Saturn I and that was the unmanned command modules. And spacecraft operations, both command service module as well as lunar module, didn't really have anybody in Blockhouse 34 other than an operations guy, because our control rooms were over on the industrial area in the O&C building. They were ACE control rooms, automatic checkout equipment. So my boss says, that's your bailiwick, you need to go out there and be in the blockhouse. So I convinced him I needed one Rockwell guy. So I got one Rockwell guy, his name was Bucket Milliken. And he and I went out and we sat on the same consoles that the IBM guys sat. When it launched, all the lights went off in the blockhouse. His sound started coming in, wow, wow, wow. And my buddy and I happened to look up at one of the monitors and it was nothing but flame. Black and white, but you could tell it was heat. We dove under the console. We thought the rocket had fallen on us.
Oh, God.
So he and I fought each other to get under the console. And then we noticed nobody else was doing that, so we kind of looked out, and one of the test supervisors was draped over the periscope looking out. Everybody was kind of quiet, and we thought, something's not right. So we eased out from under the console. Everybody was looking up, so they didn't see us. But what had happened, the flame from the Saturn had burnt one of the major power cables out at the pad, which fed back into the main power system and blew all the breakers. There was a radar Doppler that started. That was the sound we heard. And one of the TVs was on a burn pond. And of course, we thought that was a catastrophe occurring when it was all normal. So we decided after that, we're going to watch everybody else in the blockhouse and we'll do what they did. That's how I got to know the IBM guys. Good guys.
Oh, yeah.
But some of this stuff...
The real men in black.
Well, the men in black. These, which are matchbook covers for all of the manned Apollo flights, and there's 12 of them here. There's 2 stacks. But each of the crews used to send these out. When they would show up, this is one of the things that they did to give to people just to show them their appreciation for their help. And after the program was over, somebody got very industrious and started putting them all together, so you could end up with a complete set of the Apollo matchbooks. So these are very memorable. It's got a picture of the patch for each of the Apollo missions. Very collectible item. We have some of these in our Space Museum up in Titusville.